My name is Larry Bodine. I've been a precinct committee man for 20 years. I currently serve as the secretary for Democrats of Greater Tucson. I was also the chair of Legislative District 18, which was quite an adventure. But tonight, I'm here as your moderator. And so to set some ground rules so that everybody gets an equal opportunity to be heard, I'm going to ask each of the three candidates here to give us a 60-second self-introduction. And then as we go through questions, we're going to try to hold the conversations to about 3 minutes in a reply. And that way we can get through all of the prepared questions and hopefully get to some in the chat. And with that, let me get started. You're our senior elected official, Stephanie. Would you please give us your 60-second intro?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome, LD21. It's good to be among friends tonight. I am your state representative, Stephanie Stahl Hamilton, an Arizonan born in northeastern Arizona, spending my childhood years on Navajo tribal lands. Married my husband in Flagstaff. We moved to Tucson in 2003, where we have raised our 3 children. And it was that act of raising our children where we struggled mightily. And it was in that struggle that I realized if people like me, with all of the privilege I have, are struggling to raise a family in the state of Arizona, what are families with fewer opportunities and resources doing? And that is what led me to leaning into policy work and getting involved at the very local level and working as a volunteer for a good 12 years before I finally decided to run for office. Did a lot of advocacy work with several different organizations up at the Capitol and in the community before running for office. And I am assuming that's probably about 60 seconds. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to Maritza Higuera. Please give us your 60-second intro.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Maritza Higuera. I live in Rio Rico, Arizona. I born in Tucson, Arizona, grew up in Nogales, Sonora. When I was 18 years old, I came back to learn everything, the language. I wanted to become a teacher. I worked for the Head Start programs for 21 years, 14 as a teacher, 7 as a health and nutrition coordinator. I am the proud wife of a first responder, the mom of a National Guard soldier. I have 4 kids. My background is in education. I am an author. I am a business owner. I have an educational ranch here in Rio Rico, Arizona. I am also a vice president of Public Safety Global Alliance, a nonprofit organization. And I am the candidate that lives in the rural and border area. I'm just looking for more opportunities to serve with my background, with my knowledge, and to support and bring more to our district. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Miranda Lopez is on her way to the program. And so let me turn it over to Michael, who has a statement for her on her behalf.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the LD21 Democrats for hosting this candidate forum. My name is Michael. I'm Miranda's fiance, and I'll be reading her statements on her behalf until she's able to join the meeting. She is out right now attending an anti-ICE protest in solidarity with our community, but she should be back in time for questions. She has been showing up for her community for 8 years as a field organizer in Flagstaff in 2018, as the executive director of the Pima County Democrat Party, as Southern Regional Director at the Arizona Students Association, as a UCWAZ member walking picket lines. Now she is running for the state legislature after losing her job in December. She knows what paycheck to paycheck looks like because she is living it. She believes an accessible and high-quality public education is the foundation of everything, that working families deserve to be able to afford to buy a home, and that we cannot give away our water to billionaires. She believes that tenants deserve the same rights and protections as landlords, and she believes that unions and the people, and she believes in the people, unions and the people who do the work.
Thank you so much. So the first question I want to tackle is affordability. This is something that affects everybody. A typical rent in LD21 is anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. The median home value of a house is $250,000 to $350,000. That and the cost of gas and groceries and food and pharmaceuticals just puts the American way of life out of reach. So let me turn to you first, Stephanie. Tell us what legislation you plan to introduce to address affordability.
What legislation for affordability? First and foremost, for the last 3 years now, one piece of legislation I have introduced that I, again, plan on doubling down and working really hard on is paid family medical leave. One of the things that we know in the state of Arizona is that we do not have enough childcare. And the care economy is not great in the state of Arizona. We don't have enough elder care. And employees should have an assurance that when they take time off from work and from their employment in order to care for family members, whether that's welcoming a new child into the home or whether it's taking time off to care for a very sick loved one, they should have the assurance of being able to go back to their job. Paid family medical leave has enabled so many businesses. This is a small business thing, has enabled so many small businesses to have consistent employees. There is less turnover. They have to invest less in training and getting employees onboarded. And this is for small businesses as well as big businesses. So something that I have been very committed to in the last 3 sessions have introduced, and we have refined the policy as we go, is this paid family medical leave. And should we flip our chamber and have Governor Hobbs back in office, I know for certain we're going to get that bill through, and that will make a huge difference in the lives of our families, and especially those who need that time off of work to care for a loved one. Some of the other things that we are working on, and certainly when we look at our utilities, I know the Corporation Commission is there to help us make sure that our families, our ratepayers, are not having to pay exorbitant fees. But I have to tell you that at the legislature, some of the legislation that we are able to introduce are things like trying to push forward smart legislation on solar, increasing our energy portfolio in order to make sure that we have not only reliable energy, but the energy that we have in our portfolio is affordable for our people. And then certainly when we look at housing, there has been a lot that we've done to address the needs of housing. Some of it has been, there has been a lack of supply. Supply is not going to be the only thing that lowers housing cost, but it is one of the critical pieces. We have supported LIHTC, which is low income housing tax credit.
Let me turn now to Maritza, if I may. Same question for you. If you are elected into the legislature, what legislation would you specifically introduce and what policies would you like to implement?
Thank you. With my background in early childhood education, I will love also, and I agree that childcare affordability is very necessary. It is a must for working parents, so expanding childcare assistance, and for working families, that will be wonderful. And also to not be repetitive, but in agreeing in much in healthcare costs and housing, I also want to share about supporting small businesses, making sure that we support rural entrepreneurs, and to also reduce unnecessary regulations sometimes for they happens for small business owners, and also to lower grocery costs in a way where we can invest in local agriculture. We have lots of agricultures and agricultural businesses within our rural areas here in our District 21, and also strengthen our supply chains, support farmers and produce distributors to make sure that we lower our grocery cost.
All right, thank you very much. What can we do to afford gas, housing, rent, pharmacies, groceries? And what specific legislation would you bring to the legislature and what policies would you like to implement?
Yeah, so the problem with affordability is that what's really underlying all of it is corporate greed. With housing, we have all of these different special interests and corporations that not only are buying up housing, but are also buying our politicians and making it more difficult for us to enact legislation that would improve the lives of our renters, of our first-time home buyers, and the same for education, the same for water. And some of the specific policies that I would push for would be to completely eliminate the universal voucher program and to reinvest that money into the public education system itself. I would push to freeze tuition at our public universities, For affordable housing, I would push for not only funding the Arizona Housing Department on a 4-year basis instead of I think it's on a 1 or 2-year basis right now, but also to reestablish the Arizona housing credit from the federal government. So yeah, basically the school vouchers for housing, we need to fund our Arizona state or Arizona Housing Department on a 4-year basis rather than just I think it's a 1 or 2-year basis. We need to also bring back the housing tax credit. For our environment, we need to update the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. In addition to having a plan once the data center moratorium is up in 3 years, we have to make sure that we have some actions planned as to what's going to happen after that, make sure that we have the research behind our decision to really make sure that these data centers do not harm the communities, because they're really only there for, especially these mega data centers right now, are only there to benefit their investors.
One of the topics that's extremely important in Arizona right now is education. Believe it or not, Arizona is rated as the worst schools in the country. Worse than Mississippi, worse than Alabama. We need some sort of legislation that will deal with improvement of schools and dealing with the vouchers. And Maritza, let me turn to you first and tell us what bill you would introduce or what actions you would take to not make Arizona schools the worst in the nation.
Thank you for the question. And again, I am a mom of 4 children, all 4 they're being in public schools. One of them graduated as a valedictorian here in Rio Rico High School. I know that we have our ESA vouchers and also our public schools, and we parents are getting to know more and more their choices. I know we must ensure that our public schools remain strong, because at the end they educate the majority of Arizona children, and they deserve to be helped. Every schools help every children who walks at those public school stores. We need to make sure that we invest in excellent teachers, in classrooms resources, in special education, in rural schools, while respecting those family choices, but making sure that the goal it's not divided, but making sure that the schools do not go against each other, but we create a balanced system where every child have access to high quality education, regardless of the path the family chooses. I live in a rural area close to the border, and public schools for us are the strength and are the heart of us, of our people, and of our students. So making sure that we invest on our teachers, classrooms, resources, and special educations will be, for me, very important to continue to push forward. And getting to know, also making sure that we balance what we have, but making sure that our public funding stays within our public schools.
What about school vouchers? They eat $1 billion out of the public schools budget, and there's 100,000 kids that are enrolled, and the money, 30% of the program is fraud. What steps would you take to correct that specifically?
Definitely making sure that we have and that we go through a process of eligibility. We do that often within our programs as a Head Start teacher and then coordinator. We go and we make sure that we balance who comes in, who needs that support, and who needs to be placed in a waiting list or resources that they can be supported. So making sure that we have rail guards, that we go through an eligibility process will be very necessary.
I'm going to push back a little bit and say that we don't have the worst schools in the nation. And those of us who are parents whose kids have gone through some schools have gotten a pretty good education, number one. Number two, my husband's a teacher in our education system. What we have are the worst funded schools in the nation. And there is a difference there. We have very dedicated teachers. We do not have enough. We have a teacher retention problem, but we've got dedicated individuals who show up day in, day out for our children and for our families. They are not the worst schools in the nation. They are the poorest funded, and our educators are not on par with the national average for teacher pay. That has a drain on the system and it eats at the system, but we do not have the worst schools in the nation. Now, secondly, I cut my teeth working on voucher reform, or stopping that voucher expansion. The state has an obligation to teach all of our learners, all of them. Every student who shows up to a public school, we are obligated to educate. Some of our children that show up have such critical needs that we do not have the resources. Those are the children that the school vouchers were meant for. It is taking state dollars to make sure our most vulnerable children have the resources they need for an education, and I am all for that. What needs to happen with the voucher system is that parents who have been sending their children to school and have been paying that bill should not get free money from the state. Public dollars belong in the public schools, period. They do not belong in private schools. They do not belong in private religious schools. And that was my stance back in 2017 and 2018 when I worked for Save Our Schools, repealing that first voucher expansion. And I will continue to say that. Now, the other thing that is really problematic and complicated when it comes to education is that we have an archaic funding formula, which is also a bit of a patchwork quilt. It is complex, it is difficult to understand, it is nuanced, and that funding formula does not enable us to fund our schools fully. As we continue to shrink our state budget, that shrinks the percentage of what tax dollars can go into education. And that is a funding formula that was set up in the 1980s. That is over 40 something years old, almost 50 years old. We need to update our funding formula. We need to get serious about what it is that it takes to have a robust education. We need to make sure that the funding is there, not only for our teacher salaries, but for every person who steps into a school district that touches the life of a child. So there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful answer. Miranda, let me spotlight you. Would you answer the education question, which is, what would you do about school vouchers?
Yeah, school vouchers is yet another Republican answer to the increasingly more complex problem that has become the Arizona education system. Like Representative Stahl Hamilton was saying, the way that we fund schools has become this really weird way that doesn't entirely fund what we actually need in order to make the schools run properly, in order to make sure that teachers get the salaries that they deserve. And instead of trying to fix the system and figure out how we can reinvest our state dollars into the public education system, instead of doing that, Republicans have decided we'll give up on public education. We'll create this charter school program with the illusion of choice for all. And I say illusion because charter schools, even though it offers the choice of being able to send your kid to school, not everybody gets that same choice. There are a lot of parents who are not able to send their kid to one of these charter schools, either because they didn't win in the lottery-based system, or they are not able to actually physically transport their kids to that school. Maybe they can't afford to send lunch with their kid to school every day. There are a lot of these social and economic barriers that keep a lot of working families from being able to choose these charter schools. And it's the same for the voucher program. It's just another Band-Aid onto what is a really systemic and really foundational problem in the funding system. So instead of creating more of these problems that become more expensive for our taxpayers, that continue to marginalize families and continue to keep education access away from these working families. Instead of doing that, what I think we should do is, first of all, get rid of the voucher program and just try to rework the idea of education being a choice. Education is a right. And if something is a right, that means everyone should have the same access. And then working towards that goal of making sure that everyone has access. And when I say getting rid of the voucher program, I also mean investing in schools enough to the point where they do have the resources to help students with learning disabilities and with physical disabilities. That was the reason why the voucher program was started, was because systematically over decades, our schools have been constantly receiving cuts to different programs, after school programs, and special education as well. And so if we can reinvest those dollars back into our programs, it's not only available on a single student by student basis, it's actually available to the community as a whole, which is better for us as a society, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. I want to bring up a new topic, and that is the topic of healthcare. It's actually a multi-pronged problem. There are 4 rural hospitals and health centers in LD21, and their funding is at risk. It's becoming very difficult to support rural hospitals, while at the same time, half of the people who were signed up to receive SNAP benefits and food stamps under Obamacare have resigned from the program because they can't afford it. I know people who said, I'm just going to go without health insurance because it's too much money. Let me turn to you, Stephanie. What are some steps that you as a legislature can take to correct that problem, or those problems?
A couple of things. What we need to know about the 4 hospitals that we have in the rural parts of our district, there are 2 in Nogales. One is a healthcare center that has a different type of funding. The other is which is the Mariposa Healthcare Clinic. And then we have Holy Cross Medical Center, which is a critical access hospital. And then in Bisbee, we have the Copper Queen, which is the critical access hospital. And then the Cochise Chiricahua Healthcare Clinics, which is very similar to the Mariposa. The funding for those are very different, but the critical access hospitals with our funding, the effects of HR1, that big ugly bill from last year, really was eroding a lot of the funding coming into those critical access hospitals in rural Arizona. And some of the subsidies have also disappeared because of the Trump administration. So one of the things that we did, we had a plan to help. And one of the things that we did was we, at the state legislature, I'm ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, we pushed hard to have the money to backfill some of those cuts from HR1. We did a good job. However, there's still so much more to do. And once we got to the end of session, there was some ARPA dollars that needed to be allocated and spent here pretty quickly by September, I believe, and would not be spent. And so they were returned to the state, and we went back in and were able to allocate more funding to Holy Cross and to the Copper Queen, our critical access hospitals in rural Arizona. The funding for the Mariposa Clinic and the Chiricahua, those come from grants, they come from private dollars. The pharmaceutical program is something that comes through federal dollars, and those are drawdown programs. And that's not something that state dollars. So when we talk about care in rural Arizona, we have to understand that there are a couple of systems. Now, I will pause there because you talked about SNAP, and SNAP is different than healthcare. SNAP is healthy foods, but also is a casualty to what happened with HR1, the big ugly bill, and that all of our food services have been hit dramatically. Again, we at the state legislature, and the Democrats in particular in both chambers, those of us in the negotiating room for the budget, were able to allocate funding to go back in and backfill. Now, some of this is going to be a one-time fix. Next year is going to be an even tougher year. But I am actively at the table working to make sure that our services, especially healthcare and our SNAP benefits, are intact for our people, not only in our district, but throughout the state of Arizona.
Thank you. Let's go in reverse order on the next question, and that would be data centers. I believe there are 2 data centers in LD21. There's the Nogales Data Center, as well as Project Blue. And of course, these data centers require a tremendous amount of electricity as well as water, neither of which we have in gigantic supply here in Arizona. What legislation or what steps would you take, Miranda, in terms of the expansion of data centers in Arizona?
I would try to prevent the expansion of data centers as much as possible. There is a pretty big significant difference between data centers and mega data centers. We do have data centers as just part of our everyday lives. There's a data center on the U of A campus. There's lots of different businesses that require data centers just because of the research that they do or the amount of information that they have to store. The mega data centers is more of a billionaire problem where billionaires and corporations are investing in the AI bubble because they think that somehow creating all of these mega data centers will give them enough enough return on investment to generate the billions of dollars that they want to see. And I think what they're starting to realize is that it's probably not a great investment, but they're continuing to build them anyways. And we're seeing that across the country. And so it's really important for me to be able to really put a stop to this kind of corporate greed. We need to stop incentivizing these mega data centers. We need to make sure that the data centers that we currently do have are not only not raising utility rates for consumers, but also not using the water supply, not generating more heat in a state where we're already facing hundreds of people dying from heat exposure every year. And then in addition to that, there's also some of the issues that we're having with groundwater and corporations being able to come in and basically take as much groundwater as they want. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that department. But I would be a fierce advocate to make sure that we're prioritizing our communities rather than these corporations who say that they're going to invest in our economy and create all these jobs, and yet we're not seeing that. Working people are definitely not seeing that on the ground. And the jobs that they're bringing to our communities, they're short-lived. They don't really offer a lot of long-term sustainability to the community. And yeah, that would be basically my position.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me turn now to Maritza and ask you the same question. What's your stance on data centers? Are they job creators or do they just steal water and electricity?
No, I truly agree with what Miranda mentioned. We got to make sure that we know that our state it's short in water. We need to know also that what fits in our community and what resources are limited in our communities within our district and what has opportunities. We know that technology and economic development it's important, but we also need to make sure that there our people, our community, that we hear about them and their needs. Large scale data centers in areas where water resources are already limited or under stress, I do not support that. I know we got to make sure that we require the new developments demonstrate water sustainability. And I feel that's a little bit of a challenge. So we got to make sure that we invest in conservation and recycle water and provide real benefits to local communities. Existing facilities, they continue those work. We got to make sure that they have the rules and regulations that we need because it's making sure that we're working for all of us, for our constituents and for the needs of our communities.
Thank you very much. Let me return to you again, Representative Hamilton. Tell us about your view on data centers and whether they're a good thing or they're a bad thing for the communities.
Yeah, thank you. I think as anything, when we look at policy, it is always very nuanced. And I'm hesitant to put things on the binary of good or bad. I think there are trade-offs for everything that you choose to do. And I want to start off by saying that this past year at the legislature, we really focused on trying to work on policy that delivers in Arizona that we can afford. And in that delivering in Arizona that we can afford, we were the caucus that brought forward a moratorium or a pause on the tax credits that are going to new data center development here in the state of Arizona. Right now, data centers are not popular no matter where you are in the United States. I talk to my colleagues throughout the United States, and we're seeing this as a very troubling, big problem throughout. Now, as been pointed out, the data centers do provide certain things, but I think for me, as a former ranking member in the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee, I do think that we have to pay attention to what is sustainable and to our natural resources. And right now, ample water and clean air are so very important. And so I was proud to say that we made a huge effort to put a pause on those on the tax credits going out, which puts money back into the general fund where we can use in other places. But the other piece is we think that there's going to be a burst in the bubble and we may not need to continue that tax credit after the moratorium. The second thing, I think we really need to pay attention to the hyperscale data centers and the small scale data centers, and in particular pay attention to the air, the water that is being used, and a factor that a lot of people don't realize is the noise that data centers produce. That also brings down the quality of life. And most certainly, we do not have the infrastructure energy-wise to sustain the power necessary for these hyperscale data centers. And right now, the way things are structured, if a project like Project Blue comes in, that the energy costs are going to be pushed over to our families. And it does not make an Arizona that we can afford. And the last thing with these hyperscale data centers, and something that legislatures are starting to scramble throughout the United States, hyperscale data centers are used for all of the development of AI. And state legislatures throughout the United States are trying to figure out safeguards and policies around AI. And certainly for me, I don't want AI replacing everyday jobs. I am not for putting our people out of work to be replaced by data centers and AI.
Okay. Thanks very much. Let me ask Marcy, if I might, do we have any questions from the audience in the chat that we might turn to?
The first one we have is from Senator Gobbledome. What steps would you work towards to bring the next bucket of wet water to Arizona?
Let's see. Why don't we start with Maritza? Why don't you give us an answer to that?
Yeah, where are we getting our water from?
No, I know I've been in a couple of talks here within our county about water and water rights and the exchange of water rights from Colorado and Arizona, and the work that we have also to do to make sure that we have clean water and that we have water that it can be clean for us to drink for our animals. So the steps that I'm thinking, first of all, with new eyes and as a new leader here to be your next representative for the legislature, will be for me to sit down and hear what it's been work, what have been the challenges. I know we have many. Obviously, like I shared before, we had this conversation here within our district, it starts from the beginning and with our leaders about what has been done and how can we make sure that we continue to educate all of us together about recycling water, about taking care of our water, and what has been done within our counties, within our cities, about water rights, about clean water, and how can we make sure that we improve and that we move forward. I will make sure on my end, on my side, to see what has been work, what has been the challenges, and also obviously talk to our constituents here, to our ranchers, to the people that lives in our rural areas, in the communities where we have shortage of waters, what has been done within our cities and within our counties, and see how can we sit down together and make sure that we have drinkable water for all of us together, for our agriculture, for our animals, making sure that we bring opportunities about water conservation and about education on continue to save our water and obviously our water rights and what can be done within our whole district to, again, to conserve this water and make sure that this data centers or other big businesses come here, making sure that we save our water, making sure that we sit down, that we have a big knowledge about it, of what has been happening and how can we move forward.
Thank you. Let's turn to you, Miranda. Tell us what you would do about water in Arizona.
So I think the best way to think about water in Arizona is the reduce, reuse, recycle that we see in when we're talking about like composting and recycling. The same can apply to water, where we want to first reduce our use of water. The Groundwater Management Act of 1980 is basically allowing about 80% of the state's current groundwater use to just go unchecked. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these corporations, both national and international, coming into Arizona specifically because they know that they can draw as much water as they want and not face any consequences or accountability for it. So that is definitely one of the top priorities for me, is to update our Groundwater Management Act, reduce the use, first of all, reuse. So I think it's well worth investing more in systems like creating or making potable water, or having people use more potable water more often, and creating that infrastructure that will allow us to recycle the water that we are already using in a more efficient way. I don't think it's as plausible to be bringing in water, or like shipping in water, or even desalinating water or things like that. Those projects to me seem a lot more expensive than they're actually going to provide for us. And I think that as long as we're living in the desert, we have to be able to use the water that we have. We have to be able to use it responsibly, and we have to make sure that when other people come into the state, that they are also using that water responsibly. So in my opinion, it's best to reduce and reuse as much as we have before even thinking about how we can potentially take water from other sources.
The only thing that I think in the state of Arizona that is more complex than our funding formula for public education are the laws we have regarding water. And truly, so much has been done throughout the state regarding our active management areas, where we've got some really good water regulations in place that help us. It is truly, we've got two types of water in Arizona. We have our surface waters, which Colorado River, Salt River, and then we have our groundwater, which is what it comes from our aquifers. And where we are seeing the most amount of stress is in the groundwater and groundwater pumping. And that tends to fall in some of our rural areas. However, there has been a lot of stress on the Colorado River water system as well. Conservation is not going to get us there, but we have done a lot to for conservation. This latest ag to urban, what we find is that our urban areas have learned to conserve very well, and that in our urban areas, we are using the same amount of water that we were in 1979, and yet we've had this population explosion because we have learned to conserve water in our urban areas. And our tribes still need to get their water right. So before we can talk about the next big bucket of water, we've got to make sure we know how much water we're dealing with. But Ag to Urban was a step. We got to get the rest of our tribes, get their water adjudicated, get those cases adjudicated. And then third, we've got some incredible agreements with California right now to the point of desalination. I think desalinated water is going to be some of the most expensive water that we will have. However, we can pay California to desalinate their water while we pick up their shares of the Colorado River water. And this is something that 4 years ago I would have thought was near impossible with California. But right now, because of how much the Colorado River is being stressed, and we are still trying to figure out agreements, because we also have water agreements, a compact with the 4 northern basin states, with the 3 southern basin states. And we're trying to figure out what a reallocation looks like, because that compact expires here. Never has California and Arizona been more aligned when it comes to water. So I think the next big bucket of water is going to, in part, come from California and whatever water exchange we have with them. Environmentally, I've got some concerns about that, but I do think it is something that is already in the works, and we're headed in that direction.
We have a question from Chris Donat, who asks a transportation question. He mentions that the Republicans in the legislature have been very hostile to intercity rail projects in Arizona. And he was inquiring about what transportation infrastructure projects would you support to make it easier to get around the state?
Tongue in cheek, but seriously, anything that Senator Gabaldon supports, because let me give a shout out to the senator who has been on the transportation committee her whole time in the legislature. But beyond working collaboratively with this senator. Yeah, light rail seems to now fall in some sort of ideological argument space at the legislature, but I don't think I'm ready to give up on that and an expansion of light rail. I know that we've talked about a high speed rail from Tucson to Phoenix, but what's to say that we couldn't provide it all the way up to the northern part of the state to Vegas, right? It would be expensive. We'd have a lot. I'm not for tearing up sacred spaces in the land, but if there was a way that we could collaborate on mass transportation, I would be all for that. So many industries. Arizona is a path through for the trucking industry. That goods that come up from Mexico, goods that come from Texas, head into California, they use our roads, and we're constantly needing to upgrade roads. And I think with that and trying to help this transportation corridor, some spaces in our rural Arizona also get neglected. And while it's important to focus on what we can do collaboratively in our urban areas, I also think that it is critical that people in the rural part of our state have safe roads that they can drive on. So transportation is a big, huge, gnarly thing. And while I lived on the East Coast for 10 years in the Boston area, and I didn't own a car because I relied 100% solely on public transportation. I loved it. It was the best way to get around. Our infrastructure here is a little bit different, but I'm not above pushing for that. I think it's an important step in our development so that we can tend to some of the other things that we need to in the state, like improving our roads in rural Arizona, making sure people have safe roads to drive on.
Thank you very much. Let me also put that to Miranda. Tell us how you would improve public transportation in Arizona.
I think one of the first things we have to do is look at how we are funding our infrastructure and our roads, take another look at that gas tax and see how funds are being allocated from that gas tax. Maricopa County is getting an insane amount of money compared to Pima County or any of the rural counties just because they have, I think it's 95% incorporated land. And we can see that in our roads and our infrastructure and our bridges. We are not getting the funding that we need to maintain these really essential structures. And so that would definitely be one of my top priorities, is bringing that to the table. The next thing, I think a rail service from Tucson to Phoenix would be great. I think that is the ideal to shoot for. But like Representative Stahl-Hamilton was saying, it's definitely going to require a lot of coordination and a lot of reaching out to tribal groups, reaching out to rural areas to make sure that they are not overlooked in that process. But that is definitely something that I would be very supportive of. Transportation in general for working families, I feel, is one of the more significant boundaries or barriers when it comes to getting a job, when it comes to the freedom of being able to travel. Here in Arizona, you're 100% reliant on your car most of the time. And so if anything happens to your car, which is a very expensive thing to maintain every single month with insurance, and if your car breaks down with the tires, I have to buy new tires almost every 2 years. And so being able to reduce that barrier by investing more in public transportation, so not just a rail system between Tucson and Phoenix, but also giving cities and counties the support that they need to invest more into their own systems of public transportation, I think would be super, super beneficial for our working families who don't always have the ability to use this car system that we've created for ourselves. So those would be the main things that I would be focused on.
Over to you, Maritza. Tell us about what you would do and add or change with transportation in Arizona.
As the wife of a first responder, for me and living in a rural and border community, safe roads are very important. It's a must to make sure that we know which ones first and take care of our roads within our district first, making sure that we know that we have, for example, billions of cars moving back and forth from our border that also bring businesses, truck drivers driving from the border to other parts of the state and other parts of the United States, making sure that our roads are safe. Yes, checking on how can we allocate funding for are these roads with either gas taxes or with other different type of funding, but making sure that first our roads in District 21 are well taken care of. Door knocking in Bisbee and Naco areas, I had some important highlights about making sure also that our roads for tourism were well taken care of, like from our bikers moving from Bisbee to Naco and traveling, going inside the town of Bisbee and traveling around it. Those infrastructure and those roads were safe for them. Same for our border here, making sure that when all these truck drivers pass by, there are people that are driving to school or to works, they also have room that they're well taken care of. So making sure at first that our roads in rural, border, and our city areas within our district that are first making sure they're taken care of, and see how then we can move forward to allocate also more movement within from the big cities to Phoenix. But it will be for me very important to make sure that also that we allocate funding, we see how can we make sure that these gas taxes are working for our district, within our district inside, making sure that all these areas in specific are taken care of and that we listen to our residents that are living within those areas. We have many roads to fix that have a lot of traffic in cities and in borders, yes, and rural areas. So making sure first that we fix those so we have less fatalities and secure roads.
I want to thank all of the candidates tonight and what wonderful candidates we have in LD21. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to speak to all of the primary voters out there. I appreciate everybody attending and everybody speaking tonight. Thank you so much.
I will also add my thanks to the candidates tonight for participating in this, and knowing that an email came in today from Eric Robbins saying 10% of the ballots have been returned. So make sure you get your ballots in. It's too late to put them in the mail, but you can walk them in to any of the voting sites, vote on voting day, tell all your friends, tell all your family, so we can get that number up from 10%. And my thanks also to Larry from LD18, willing to facilitate that was very helpful, really appreciate it. So now I'm going to turn it over to our chair, Cynthia, for any closing remarks.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you again, Larry, for taking time out of your day to help us with this. Thank you to our senator and representative who attended, as well as our new candidates. We appreciate you taking time to be here and to let some more of us hear where you stand on policy. Watch for this video. We are going to do our best to get it edited and put maybe into YouTube so you can review it again, share it with people. I know we don't have a lot of time left since the voting is next Tuesday. So please get your votes in, help your friends and family get to wherever they need to get the vote in. Drive people to the polling places if you need to. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you so much.